It started as an ordinary day in Dublin, but by nightfall, a horror unlike any other would unfold. A mother, her two daughters, and a man who would never live to see the next sunrise. What began as a night of drinking spiraled into one of Ireland's most gruesome crimes, a murder so brutal, so unthinkable, that it sent shockwaves through the nation. In the dimly lit apartment on Richmond Cottages, tensions rose. Heated words turned to violence, and soon, the sound of a Stanley knife slicing through flesh filled the room. A hammer swung repeatedly. The victim, Farah Noor, stood no chance against the storm of rage that descended upon him. But the horror did not end with his death. His body was not left intact. It was hacked apart piece by piece, his remains scattered across Dublin, some never to be found again. His head, the most critical piece of evidence, disappeared, leaving investigators puzzled and the public horrified. Why did this happen? What led two young women barely out of their youth to commit such a heinous act? Was it years of suffering, a mother's whispered command, or something even darker lurking beneath the surface? As the investigation unfolded, secrets emerged, and the truth revealed itself in bits and pieces. But the biggest question remains: what happened in that room on that fateful night? And why did it have to end this way? Brace yourself as we unravel the shocking case of Ireland's infamous Scissor Sisters of the Mulhall family. Welcome to the Crime Series. I am glad to have you join us on another video. Kindly subscribe, like, and share. Let me know where you are watching from. The Mulhall family lived in Kilclare Gardens, a working-class neighborhood in Tallaght, South Dublin. Like many families in similar communities, they faced financial struggles and hardships. Life was not easy for them, and problems at home only made things worse. John and Kathleen Mulhall were the parents, raising 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. Their home was filled with tension and conflict, mainly because of John's reported violent behavior towards Kathleen. He had a history of angry outbursts, which created a toxic environment for the children. Growing up in such a household, the Mulhall siblings were exposed to constant fear and instability. Kathleen Mulhall, whose maiden name was Kathleen Ward, was from the traveling community, a group in Ireland that has historically faced discrimination and hardship. Coming from this background may have made life even more difficult for her. Eventually, Kathleen left John, hoping for a better life away from the abuse. However, her struggles were far from over, and the family continued to experience hardship. In 2002, Kathleen entered a relationship with Farah Noor, a man who had come to Ireland claiming to be a refugee from Somalia. However, this was later revealed to be a lie. He was actually from Kenya and had a history of violent crimes, including rape and assault. Despite his dangerous past, Noor became a part of the Mulhall family's lives, bringing more chaos and instability. Kathleen's relationship with Noor was troubled from the start. There were reports of physical and emotional abuse, and her children never trusted him. From the moment they met him, Linda and Charlotte Mulhall saw him as a threat to their already broken family. They disliked him intensely, and over time, their resentment grew. This growing hatred eventually led to one of the most horrific crimes in Ireland's history. The events that followed shocked the nation. Linda Mulhall was born in 1975. The second eldest of 6 siblings, Linda's formal education was cut short early in her teenage years. She left school before obtaining any qualifications, a common occurrence in troubled households where survival often took precedence over academic success. Without stable parental guidance or strong role models, she drifted away from structured learning and instead sought comfort in friendships and environments that encouraged rebellion. By her late teens, Linda found herself in a long-term relationship that led to the birth of 4 children. However, the relationship was far from stable. Over time, it became strained due to financial difficulties and substance abuse. Eventually, the father of her children left, leaving Linda to raise them alone. The pressure of single motherhood, combined with her own personal struggles, pushed her further towards self-destructive habits. Following the breakdown of her first serious relationship, Linda entered another turbulent partnership with a man named Wayne Kinsella. This relationship would prove even more damaging, not just to Linda but to her children as well. Kinsella had a history of violent behavior and was later convicted of extreme cruelty towards children. Reports from social services detailed how he subjected Linda's children to severe physical abuse, including beating them with an electrical flex. This led to a child protection intervention, and eventually, the children were placed into care by social services. The loss of her children was a devastating blow to Linda, increasing her feelings of helplessness and failure. Rather than seeking support or rehabilitation, she spiraled deeper into substance abuse, turning to alcohol and other substances to cope with the emotional pain. Linda's addiction to different substances took hold in the late 1990s and persisted into the early 2000s. Her dependence on drugs fueled erratic behavior and led her to engage in petty criminal activities. In 1993, she received a conviction for theft, marking the beginning of her legal troubles. By the time Linda reached her late 20s, she was deeply entrenched in a life of addiction, instability, and desperation. Losing custody of her children had left her emotionally fractured, and she lacked any form of structured support. She moved between various temporary accommodations, spending time at her mother Kathleen's residence, where she became increasingly involved in the dysfunctional dynamics of her family. It was in this fragile state, plagued by past trauma, addiction, and poor decision-making, that Linda found herself present on the night that would change her life forever. Her sister Charlotte Mulhall was born in 1984. Charlotte's early years were marked by school absences, defiance of authority, and a growing disconnect from societal norms. She struggled academically and displayed behavioral problems that often placed her at odds with teachers and school staff. By her teenage years, she had already developed an affinity for alcohol, frequently engaging in underage drinking and experimenting with illicit substances. Her environment provided little intervention or guidance. With her mom engaged in an abusive relationship with Farah Swaleh Noor and her father battling his own demons, Charlotte was left to navigate life without adequate parental supervision. By her late teens, Charlotte had accumulated several minor convictions, primarily for public order offenses and criminal damage. Her behavior grew increasingly erratic, often leading to altercations with law enforcement. These offenses typically involved incidents of disorderly conduct, property damage, and verbal altercations. Linda and Charlotte's stepdad, Farah Swaleh Noor, the victim of this documentary, was born in 1965 in Mombasa, Kenya. His early life remains largely undocumented, but it is known that he spent his formative years in East Africa. He later made his way to Ireland in December 1996, where he falsely claimed to be a Somali refugee named Shilila Salim, alleging that his family had been killed in Mogadishu during the Somali Civil War. Subsequent investigations by Irish authorities later revealed that his true identity was Kenyan and that his family was still alive. Despite being ordered for deportation by the Department of Justice, Equality, and Law Reform, Noor appealed the decision and was granted Irish citizenship in March 1999 after fathering an Irish-born child. Noor's criminal history in Ireland was extensive and deeply troubling. He had multiple prior convictions, including offenses for intoxication, threatening and abusive behavior, and physical assault. His name became associated with violent behavior, particularly towards women, with Garda, National Police Service of Ireland, describing him as an individual prone to aggression and brutality. In 1997, one of the most serious crimes linked to Noor came to light when he sexually abused a 16-year-old Chinese girl who was mentally disabled. The girl later gave birth to his child. This was not an isolated incident. 2 other women also had children with Noor and independently reported having been sexually abused by him. Despite facing 8 different charges related to disorderly conduct and assault, including one instance where a knife was found at the scene, Noor never served time in jail for these offenses. By the early 2000s, Noor had entered into a relationship with Kathleen Mulhall, the mother of Linda and Charlotte Mulhall. This relationship was reportedly turbulent, marked by verbal and physical abuse. Noor's behavior towards Kathleen mirrored his history of violence against women, and his presence in the Mulhall household was a source of ongoing tension and conflict. March 20, 2005 was the day that would change the lives of the Mulhall family forever. It was a public holiday, the weekend of St. Patrick's Day, a time when the streets of Dublin were filled with celebrations. The atmosphere in the city was lively, with people celebrating, drinking, and socializing. Among them were Linda and Charlotte Mulhall, their mother Kathleen, and Farah Swale Noor, Kathleen's partner. The group had spent the day drinking heavily in central Dublin. Alcohol was a common factor in their lives, and this particular day was no exception. They moved from one pub to another, consuming large amounts of alcohol, with Noor covering most of the expenses. He was known for his aggressive and unpredictable behavior, particularly when drunk, and his relationship with Kathleen was disturbing. By evening, they made their way back to Kathleen's flat, a modest and cramped apartment located at Richmond Cottages in Summerhill, Dublin. The flat had become a frequent drinking spot for the family, a place where arguments often escalated due to the influence of alcohol and substance abuse. But on this night, things would spiral beyond control. Once inside, the drinking continued.
As we go into the most intense part of this video, kindly like and subscribe to this channel. It gives me motivation to create more videos. If you love this video and wish to see more, kindly subscribe.
As the alcohol flowed, so did the tension. The three women, Kathleen, Linda, and Charlotte, began taking ecstasy pills, a drug that heightened their emotional state and altered their perception. Kathleen, perhaps wanting to ensure that Noor was just as intoxicated as they were, took one of the pills, crushed it, and secretly mixed it into Noor's drink. This act ensured that they were all under the influence of the same substance, further impairing their judgment. The combination of alcohol, ecstasy, and the already volatile dynamic within the group created a dangerous atmosphere. The four sat together in the cramped living space, the sisters relaxed but hazy under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Linda sat on a two-seater couch beside Noor, while Charlotte perched on the armrest, her demeanor watchful. Noor, emboldened by intoxication, started making unwanted sexual advances toward Linda. He leaned in, whispering into her ear, his hands snaking around her waist. His grip tightened as Linda shifted uncomfortably, trying to pull away. But Noor refused to let go. The situation escalated rapidly. Linda's body language changed from unease to frustration as she struggled against Noor's grasp. Kathleen, witnessing the encounter, reacted with immediate hostility. She began shouting at Noor, her words sharp, filled with anger and command. According to later testimony, Kathleen, their mom, issued the chilling order, "Just kill him for me." It was a moment of impulsive, unfiltered rage, an order that Charlotte took literally. Reacting without hesitation, she grabbed a Stanley knife that was within reach. The small blade was sharp and precise, designed for cutting through tough materials, but now transformed into a deadly weapon. With a single forceful motion, Charlotte slashed Noor across the throat. The deep cut sent Noor reeling backward, his hands instinctively reaching for his neck. The injury did not kill him instantly. Gurgling sounds filled the room as he tried to gasp for air. Panic might have set in at this moment, but instead, the violence escalated further. Noor, dazed and struggling, fell to the floor, his body convulsing as he attempted to stem the bleeding. Linda, watching the scene unfold, grabbed a hammer. The weight of it was familiar in her hands. She lifted it high above her head and brought it down forcefully onto Noor's skull. The first blow landed with a sickening thud. He was still moving, still fighting for life. She struck again, then again. Each impact forced his body into further spasms until he eventually lay still. Blood pooled around his head, soaking into the floor. The attack did not stop there. Noor's body was stabbed over 20 times. Kathleen, who had incited the attack, stood by as the murder unfolded. She did not intervene, nor did she attempt to stop the assault once it had begun. Instead, she watched as her daughters carried out the act that would change their lives forever. Following the brutal killing of Farah Swale Noor, Linda and Charlotte Mulhall were faced with the grim reality of concealing his body. They dragged Noor's lifeless form into the small bathroom of their mother's flat in Richmond Cottages, Dublin. At this point, their mother, Kathleen Mulhall, distanced herself from the scene, leaving her daughters to deal with the remains. Using a kitchen knife and a hammer, the sisters began the gruesome process of dismemberment. The task was neither quick nor clean. Noor's body was large, and the tools they had were inadequate for the job. The kitchen knife struggled against bone and tissue, forcing the sisters to repeatedly hack and saw at the body. The hammer was used to break the bones, making it easier to separate the limbs. The effort took several hours, during which they paused multiple times, overwhelmed by the physical and psychological strain of the task. Blood spattered the bathroom walls and pooled on the floor, making the scene almost unbearable. They first severed Noor's head, an act that took considerable effort. The head was placed in a plastic bag separately, as they were initially uncertain of what to do with it. His limbs were detached next, followed by his torso being split into smaller sections. They also cut off his a detail that later fueled media speculation about the symbolic or emotional nature of their actions. Throughout the process, the sisters wrapped towels around certain parts of the body in an attempt to contain the blood flow. Once the dismemberment was complete, the remains were divided into black plastic bin bags and a sports bag. The disposal required multiple trips to the Royal Canal, where they dumped the bags in the water, hoping the currents would carry them away. However, they decided against discarding the head in the canal, fearing it could be used for identification. Instead, they transported it by bus to Tallaght, an area on the outskirts of Dublin. To avoid suspicion, they carried the severed head in an ordinary shopping bag, walking unnoticed among commuters and shoppers. They entered Sean Walsh Memorial Park, where Charlotte used a knife to dig a shallow grave. The head was buried hastily, and they left the scene, believing the worst was over. Days later, Linda returned to the burial site, fearing that the head could still be found. She dug it up, placed it in her young son's school bag, and carried it to another location in Killinarden Estate, Tallaght. There, she used a hammer to break the skull further, ensuring that it would be unrecognizable. After smashing it into smaller fragments, she reburied the remains in another area, this time making sure that it would never be recovered. 10 days after the murder, on March 30, 2005, a passerby walking along the Royal Canal near Croke Park noticed an unusual object floating in the water. As the individual moved closer, they realized it was a human leg, still wearing a sock. Alarmed, they immediately contacted Garda, National Police Service, triggering an investigation that would eventually expose one of Ireland's most gruesome crimes. Garda sub-aqua divers were deployed to the canal, where they conducted an extensive search of the murky waters. Over the course of several days, they retrieved 7 dismembered body parts, including the torso, limbs, and sections of the victim's remains. However, 2 crucial parts of the body, the head and genitals, were missing, making identification extremely difficult. Due to the absence of a head, forensic examiners initially struggled to confirm the victim's identity. Unlike conventional murder cases, where dental records or facial recognition could be used, investigators had to rely on alternative methods. Breakthrough evidence came in the form of a distinctive T-shirt that was still attached to the torso. Investigators released images of the clothing to the public, in hopes that someone would recognize it. A crucial lead emerged when a Somali man, who was familiar with both Noor and the Mulhall family, came forward. He recognized the T-shirt as one frequently worn by Noor and informed authorities of his suspicions. His testimony provided investigators with a solid lead, linking the recovered remains to Noor. Once Noor was identified as the likely victim, Garda intensified their inquiries, focusing on his known associates. The investigation quickly led them to Kathleen Mulhall and her daughters, Linda and Charlotte, setting in motion a chain of events that would uncover the full horror of the crime. By August 2005, the Garda had gathered enough intelligence to connect Noor to Kathleen Mulhall and her daughters, Linda and Charlotte. Noor had been a known figure in the local community, and some individuals had seen him in the company of the Mulhall women. As part of their investigation, the Garda brought in the Mulhall family for questioning. At first, both sisters and their parents denied any involvement in Noor's disappearance or death. They claimed they had last seen him alive and knew nothing about his fate. Their statements were vague, and detectives remained suspicious, particularly because of their visible nervousness and reluctance to provide details. After the questioning, the case took a dramatic turn. Linda Mulhall, unable to cope with the psychological burden of what had happened, voluntarily approached the Gardaí and admitted to her role in the crime. Her confession was crucial, as it provided investigators with the first detailed account of what had transpired on the night of March 20, 2005. Her statement included chilling details, such as how they had buried Noor's head separately to prevent identification. Investigators immediately took note of this claim, as Noor's head had not been found. Linda also disclosed that the weapons used in the killing, the knife and hammer, had been thrown into a pond. Following Linda's confession, the Gardaí secured a search warrant for Kathleen Mulhall's rented flat at Richmond Cottages, where the murder had taken place. Although months had passed since the killing, forensic specialists examined the apartment for traces of evidence. Using luminol and other forensic tools, they detected blood stains in multiple areas, including the bathroom and living room. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood matched Noor's profile, further substantiating Linda's confession. Investigators also found traces of cleaning agents, indicating an attempt to sanitize the crime scene, but enough biological evidence remained for prosecution. Realizing that Linda's confession had sealed the case against them, Kathleen Mulhall made a critical decision. She fled Ireland. In September 2005, shortly after Linda's admission, Kathleen left the country and disappeared. Her sudden departure raised red flags for the Gardaí, who believed she was evading justice. Despite efforts to track her down, Kathleen remained at large for over 2 years. It wasn't until January 2008 that authorities finally located her living in England. Under growing legal pressure and fearing extradition, she voluntarily returned to Ireland in February 2008 to face charges. With Linda's confession, forensic evidence, and mounting witness testimonies, the Garda had built a strong case against the Mulhall sisters. The stage was now set for one of Ireland's most shocking murder trials. In October 2006, Linda and Charlotte Mulhall stood trial at the Central Criminal Court in Dublin for the killing of Farah Suella Noor. The courtroom was filled with intense media presence and members of the public eager to witness the proceedings of what had become one of Ireland's most notorious murder cases. The prosecution laid out a detailed case against the sisters, presenting forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and Linda Mulhall's own statements to Garda, which played a crucial role in the trial. Bloodstains matching Noor's DNA had been discovered in Kathleen Mulhall's rented flat at Richmond Cottages, contradicting the sisters' initial denial of involvement. Additionally, forensic specialists described how Noor's body had been dismembered with a combination of a Stanley knife and a hammer, a process that took hours to complete. The gruesome nature of the crime stunned the courtroom, and Justice Paul Carney presided over the trial with a stern approach. Charlotte Mulhall faced the primary charge of murder, as she was identified as the one who slit Noor's throat with the Stanley knife. The prosecution argued that Charlotte had acted with intent and that the level of violence used in the killing left no room for a defense of provocation. Witnesses testified that she had shown little remorse, and her prior history of violent tendencies was brought into question. The jury deliberated and found her guilty of murder. She was given a life sentence. Linda Mulhall was charged with murder as well, but her legal team presented a defense of provocation. They argued that Noor's behavior, which included unwanted sexual advances and physical restraint, had pushed Linda into a state of panic and temporary loss of control. The jury accepted this argument and found her guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a significant but lesser punishment than her sisters. Justice Paul Carney, in his final statements, described the case as one of the most grotesque killings he had encountered in his professional career. He highlighted the disturbing nature of the crime, particularly the dismemberment of the body and the attempt to conceal evidence. Following their sentencing, both sisters were incarcerated at Mountjoy Women's Prison in Dublin. Charlotte, serving a life sentence, was later transferred to Limerick Prison due to security concerns after photographs surfaced of her posing with a knife inside Mountjoy. The trial of the Mulhall sisters remains one of Ireland's most shocking criminal cases, drawing widespread public interest due to the brutality of the crime and the family dynamics involved. It cemented their infamy as the Scissor Sisters, a name coined by the media that would remain synonymous with one of the most heinous murders in the country's modern history. When Kathleen voluntarily returned to Ireland in February 2008, upon her arrival, she was immediately arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including providing false information to Garda regarding the whereabouts of Farah Suela Noor, withholding information that she knew or believed would aid in the prosecution of her daughters for Noor's murder, assisting in the cleanup of the crime scene to destroy or conceal evidence, which was viewed as an attempt to obstruct justice. Kathleen pleaded guilty to her role in cleaning up the crime scene, which involved disposing of Noor's blood-soaked clothing, attempting to remove traces of his presence from the flat, and helping her daughters cover up their actions. This played a crucial role in delaying the investigation, as forensic evidence was significantly compromised. During her trial in May 2009, the prosecution emphasized her direct involvement in facilitating the concealment of the crime. Although she was not present when Noor's body was dismembered, her failure to report the crime and her active role in covering up the evidence were significant factors in determining her sentence. The court handed Kathleen a 5-year prison sentence, citing the severity of her obstruction of justice. The judge acknowledged that while she did not physically commit the murder, her actions were instrumental in hindering the legal process. Kathleen served her sentence at the Dochas Center, a women's prison within Mountjoy Prison. She was released in 2013 after serving 4 years of her 5-year sentence. Upon her release, she reportedly attempted to maintain a low profile, distancing herself from public attention. The consequences of the crime deeply affected the Mulhall family, leaving a legacy of tragedy, psychological scars, and legal repercussions. The brutal murder and its aftermath created a ripple effect that forever changed the lives of those involved and those connected to them. In December 2005, John Mulhall, the father of Linda and Charlotte, took his own life in Phoenix Park, Dublin. Reports suggested he was unable to cope with the shame and devastation brought upon the family due to his daughter's actions. He was not believed to have been directly involved in the crime, but his suicide highlighted the emotional toll the case had on the family. His death left his remaining children and relatives in a state of grief and turmoil. While serving her 15-year sentence, Linda struggled with mental health issues. She became known for self-harm incidents, including slashing her arms and attempting suicide. She was hospitalized for psychiatric treatment, highlighting the severe emotional distress she endured following her involvement in the crime. In a chilling revelation made to fellow inmates in 2009, Linda claimed that she had disposed of Noor's head by smashing it with a hammer and scattering the fragments in rubbish bins around Phoenix Park. This contradicted previous statements, suggesting the head had been buried in Tallaght. This disclosure was referred to as the final secret of the Scissor Sisters. Linda was released from prison in 2018 after serving over 12 years of her sentence. Upon release, she reportedly attempted to rebuild her life in County Kildare, staying away from media attention. When approached by journalists, she declined to comment, stating she wanted to move on with her life. Unlike Linda, Charlotte Mulhall remains incarcerated, serving a life sentence for murder. She gained notoriety in 2008 when photographs surfaced showing her holding a knife to the throat of a male prisoner inside Mountjoy Prison. This incident led to heightened security measures across Irish prisons. Following the scandal, she was transferred to Limerick Prison, where she continues to serve her sentence. Reports indicate that Charlotte has struggled with prison life, with instances of violence and disciplinary issues. She is known to have had conflicts with fellow inmates and has remained under strict surveillance. Unlike her sister, who has since been released, Charlotte is unlikely to see freedom in the foreseeable future. The sister's mother, Kathleen Mulhall, fled to England following the murder, avoiding immediate legal consequences. However, in 2008, she voluntarily returned to Ireland and faced trial for her role in cleaning up the crime scene and misleading Gardaí. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 5 years in prison in May 2009. After serving her sentence, Kathleen reportedly relocated to the UK, avoiding media attention and public scrutiny. Her whereabouts remain largely unknown, and she has distanced herself from the public eye. The impact of the crime extended to other members of the Mulhall family. James Mulhall, the sister's brother, was convicted of robbing 2 prostitutes. During his trial, he claimed that he resorted to crime to support his 6 children, as well as Linda's 4 children, who he still tries to take care of any time he can. His criminal record further cemented the troubled nature of the Mulhall family dynamic. This case is a tragic reminder of how violence, abuse, and deep-rooted pain can lead to irreversible consequences. The Mulhall family's story is not just about one horrific crime. It is about a lifetime of struggle, broken relationships, and the scars left behind by a cycle of trauma. Linda and Charlotte made a choice in a moment of rage, a choice that would destroy their lives forever. Their actions cannot be justified, but they serve as a lesson. Anger and violence will never be the solution. Farah Swallow was a dangerous man with a violent past, but his gruesome fate does not erase the horror of what was done to him. The cycle of violence only led to more suffering, more loss, and a family torn apart beyond repair. To those watching, let this be a lesson about the power of choice. If you are in an abusive environment, seek help before things spiral out of control. If you are struggling with anger, addiction, or pain, reach out. There's always another way. This case may be one of the most shocking in Ireland's history, but it is also a heartbreaking reflection of what happens when trauma is left unchecked. Violence begets violence, and no one truly wins. In the end, the Mulhall sisters lost their freedom, their family, and their future. Their story is a tragic one, but it does not have to be repeated. Learn from it.